Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Peter here from AJS, and it's my delight to welcome Kirra-Lea back for the continuation of our journey through sandcasting. We're going to be talking about getting texture into our sandcasting today. So welcome, Kirra-Lea.
Hi. So today we're going to be doing basic mold making for sandcasting, and we're also going to be learning how to do texturing in the sand. So if you've got quite a boring, plain object, how you can spice it up with some texture.
Excellent. Okay, so where do we start, Kirra-Lea?
All right, well, I guess I'll start by just showing you all the tools that I'll be using. I did show everyone last week, but just in case you didn't tune in. So I like to use an assortment of sort of sculpting tools. So I'll just run through all of them. So I've got the sharp poker, I've got the fat poker, got the knifey tool, all technical terms, by the way. I've got a paintbrush, and it is for applying talcum powder, but it's also for using the back of it like a rolling pin. I have a steel straw for creating a sprue hole, ruler, and some fine nose tweezers, talcum powder, and a hammer. I also have, if you see on the other camera here, I've got Delft clay and I've got an aluminium flask. The Delft clay and the flask you can buy as a kit from AJS. I've modified my flask so that I can cast vertically. So I've cut this hole in the side of it. So I can sit it up like that and pour the metal straight down it. When you get your flask, it won't have that. It'll just have a registration mark, and you're required to cast from it horizontally. So I'll run through how to do both of those today. Alrighty, let's start by doing a pendant. So I've got this washer that I found in my partner's shed. I know it's like a bit of a boring shape, but we can like make it fun with some texture. I thought it was a good surface to use to show you guys some texture. What I'm going to be showing you first up is how you can, we don't have to do just a generic scratched surface texture. We can do something a bit more purposeful. I have these leather embossing tools that have awesome little patterns on them. I also have got these paper embossing tools, which have little round balls on them, and you can buy them in like a little kit like this with 3, and they've got all different sized balls. They can be used for making some really interesting texture too. Let's start by making our mold. So we always start on the male side of your flask. So that's the side with the lip. We want to put that lip down and then pack it from behind. The main reason why we go lip down is because I'm going to compress this clay with a hammer, which means I'm going to bring that aluminium flask a little bit. And if I'm hitting it on the lip side, it means my 2 flasks are eventually not going to fit together. But hitting it on the back of it means that my flask is nice and protected, and I'm going to have a much longer life. My flask is going to have a longer life. All right.
Hey, Kirra-Lea, good news. We've got a worldwide audience.
Fantastic. Where's this person in the world?
Well, they know you, and they're staying up late in the UK to watch your amazing tutorial. It's Antonia.
Fantastic. How amazing is that?
Yeah. So welcome, Antonia.
Welcome, Antonia.
And to everybody else who's watching around.
Of course, of course. Welcome, everyone. I've got my my male side all sorted. I've just put some talcum powder on it. That talcum powder stops the 2 clay halves from sticking together. It also helps my object come free a little easier. I'll put that washer in. I'm going to use my ruler to push it into the clay about halfway. I'm going to put my lady on top. So the female side of that flask, putting her on top, and then I'm going to pack it. You can only ever pack the female when she's on top of her male partner. You can't pack her separately. jam some clay in there and compress it with a hammer. Cut off any extra clay. Important to have these two clay halves flush. Open it up, nice and easy. There we go. Now this washer is actually quite thin. It might be about 1 mil, maybe 1.5 mil thick. I want to make it thicker so that I can cast a lot better. So I'm just going to push on that washer and make it go deeper into the clay on both halves of this sand mold. So taking it from something that might be about 1.5 to hopefully something that's 2.5. When your objects are too thin, they have trouble casting. Anything under 2 mil, the metal seems to cool down too quickly and doesn't complete its form. So if we can make it a little bit chunkier, means it's going to cast better. All right, so I'm just pushing it deeper into both halves. And this is why it's quite important to have your clay at the back of your mold smoothed off flush, not concave, because as I'm pushing on this object, I don't want that clay to give way and move too much. So I want it to be nice and supported, which is why having it flush is ideal. All right, I've just thickened that up a little bit. I'm going to do a horizontal casting for the first one. I'm just going to do my sprue hole and funnel, and I'll do it on this side. Doesn't really matter where, just somewhere. Whatever you think is the back of your pendant. With a washer like this, it doesn't have a front or back, so I just chose a random side. I've got a hole that goes straight through. Now I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to use my knifey tool, and I'm going to carve out a funnel. You want this funnel to be nice and deep. You want it to be deep, not necessarily wide. So I want it to go down. It has to be clean. So I'm using the back of my paintbrush to just smush down any of those loose bits of clay, because you don't want those loose bits of clay following your metal into your flask. It can create some nasty porosity, or it could be it could stick to the outside of your casting and create pits and holes on your surface. I'm going to get my washer and push that back in, because I feel like I've disturbed that surface a little bit, and this is just going to tidy it up. All right. Texture time. I'm going to say this is the front of my design, just because I put the sprue hole on this side, which I would then consider the back. But it doesn't really matter. It's just that I'm not going to put any texture on this side, so it's going to be easy to just file back completely flush. Where this side, I will be putting texture on it, so I'll call it my front. I'm just going to stamp it really with these leather embossing tools and the paper embossing tools. So I've just done, I'll show you guys. So it doesn't have to be super deep. The deeper you push that stamp in, the higher that design is going to be sticking out of your object. So I'm pushing it deep in here, which means it's going to be sticking up quite proud in the silver version. So keep that in mind. I'm just going to stamp a few more in here, a few different shapes. So I can show you guys. I'll also go in there with the paper embossing tools. Just make a few little boop boops. I'm using the bigger side, and then I'm going to go in with the smaller side and do some cute little random bits. I think I'll just leave it at that. I've got 3 of the leather tools, and then I've done some random little bumps. In this, they're like little concave sections, but in the positive version, they're going to be bumps. Last thing I do before I close this up and cast is I have to create an air vent. My metal is pouring in at this section here. I want it to scoot around that middle section and crash and meet here in the middle. So that's where I'm going to place my air vent. I'm just going to do a little channel, and then I'm going to go straight through. So I'm using my sharp poker tool. Flip it over, open it up. I like to open up the air vent so that if I get distracted by something shiny and put this down and come back to it, it stays open. Whereas if it's just a little pinprick, it can be sealed very easily. Let's close that up and cast. If you're about to cast and you can't see your air vent, stop what you're doing and open up your air vent again. It's very important that the air is able to escape, and as it's escaping, it's creating a vacuum and sucking that silver into your object, helping it cast. I'm just going to squeeze these 2 clay halves together a little bit, just because I know I've done a little bit of pushing on both sides. So I want the 2 clay halves to be really flush together. But with me pushing that washer into both sides, I might have accidentally forced them apart like this. So I want to be able to push them back so they're nice and flush. So I don't have all of that spillage to clean up after I've cast. So I'm just pushing, not too hard, but I'm avoiding my air vent because I still want to have air escaping. All right, I'll pop it over here. I've got my, my crucible with my crucible handle. My crucible is seasoned with borax. Safety glasses. And I've got my mini Smith torch with my gas and my oxygen. I find it just gets hot enough having the gas and the oxygen. If you've got a butane gas bottle with just atmosphere fed oxygen, it doesn't seem to get hot enough. You'll really struggle to cast. So having the oxygen mixed with the gas gets your metal hot enough that you can cast properly. We go gas first, ignite it, and then introducing oxygen, then more gas, then more oxygen. You're going to get a very sharp, angry flame, and it's going to be very noisy. You want it to be really noisy. While it's noisy, though, you can't hear me talk, so I'll just be quiet. Pretty much, I'll run through how to cast it visually, and then I'll give you a quick verbal update. All right, here we go. Or it blows out. Alrighty. Put a mask on because it's going to get smoky. So straight away after casting, your flask is cool enough to touch, which is pretty amazing because the clay is a fantastic insulator. So the heat of that metal is really contained. But if you let this sit here for a minute, the heat will disperse through the clay, then through the aluminium flask, and you won't be able to touch it. But right now, just after you've cast, you can open it. Isn't that amazing? When your excitement is at its peak, you can look. So let's open that up. So it didn't quite fully form. So I probably should have pushed it in a little bit deeper than I did. But let's get it out and have a look because I can still show you that texture. So I've got my tweezers. I'm grabbing it from the thickest, hardest part, which is where that sprue is. So I've just grabbed it from where that sprue is. Just cleaning off that burnt bit of clay so we can have a little look at the camera. Get that burnt clay out so you can have a really good visual. All right, let's try. There we go.
Beautiful,
Kind of
Kirra-Lea.
cool. Yeah, it worked really well. Didn't quite form, but I think because I didn't make it as thick as I could have. But that's all right. This is just an example.
So, Kirra-Lea, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I might have missed it, but what's the benefit of being able to pour from the side of the flask instead of the top?
Oh, you mean vertical versus horizontal? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
If I was to cast from this top part here, gravity is being our friend. Gravity is helping us to feed the metal all the way down. Where when I'm casting it from this point, metal goes here, and sure, it does spread, but it doesn't have that extra natural gravity helping feed it like it does with this vertical side. But vertical is not always better. It seems to be better for rings. It's not always better for pendants, but sometimes it is. I find horizontal does pretty well for almost everything. But vertical can just, with that gravity, just can help that little bit more, particularly with rings. Don't know if that helps answer your questions. I'll show you how to do a vertical casting in a little bit, but just for the first two, I thought I'd do horizontals because most people, when they buy their kit, they just get the horizontal flask and they haven't done any altering to it yet. So I just wanted to show you how you can cast straight away without having to do any alterations to your flask. I can't.
And a question from overseas, Antony would like to know, do you need to add fine silver to your silver if you recast it? If so, how often?
Sometimes, yes. It's a bit hard to tell when. It's usually if you're introducing scrap silver that's old jewelry, perhaps pieces that are made in overseas, like Mexico or I'm not sure. I just know that Mexican silver is a little bit different. So it's always a good idea to add in a little bit of fine silver if you are casting with silver that's been manufactured in other countries, just because their recipes are slightly different and sometimes they get a bit grouchy when they're being mixed with other alloys or when they're being remelted. If you are concerned when you're melting down scrap jewelry or old pieces of jewelry, it doesn't hurt to add some fine silver. It just seems to make the metal a little bit happier, a little bit more buttery. But if you've been using your own metal, you know it's all the metal that you've purchased and it's your castings that you're remelting down, you don't need to add fine silver to it. If you know the history of that metal and you know that it's good and fine, you shouldn't have to add any fine silver. It's just when the history is a little bit hazy, it doesn't hurt to add a little bit of fine. That helps.
I'm sure that helps. Thank you very much, Kirra-Lea.
That's all right. I'm just going to dump out the burnt part of this clay because we can't reuse it. So when I was casting, I made sure to get that metal really, really hot. And once I got it to that molten stage, I held it there for a little bit longer. It doesn't hurt to count to 5 to 10, just to make sure it really is as hot as it can be. And when I was about to pour, I had it resting against my flask, angled so it was about to fall in, but not quite. And I had that flame focused on the lip of that crucible. Held it there for about 5 heartbeats, and then I poured it. But it's not necessarily pouring, it's more like dumping it. I dumped it down the hole because you want to get your metal down the hole really quickly. And I kept my flame on the metal as it was being poured so that it didn't have a moment to get a skin on it or solidify. It just has to be really hot and has to be really fast. That's sort of the key to the success of sand casting.
So that dumping would give it extra momentum too, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, because instead of pouring, you know, like 5 grams at a time, whatever it is, instead of pouring it slowly, you're dumping like the whole 30 grams down all at once. So you've got that extra weight of that metal forcing it down inside of your object, in your negative space, sorry. So this guy here, is he cool enough to touch?
You just touched it.
It's cool enough to touch. I mean, is it cool enough to touch and not burn myself?
Now, are you going to use your artistic flair and come up with something unique out of this particular?
Oh, look, I could. It kind of looks like some elemental signs, maybe, you know, like water, fire. But I think I'll just melt the whole thing down for the next demonstration. If I really wanted to, I could remake it again. I'm not too precious with my creations. For the next one, I'm going to use this shape to make my impression, and I'm going to be doing more of an organic texturing. I've done pieces before, maybe you know them, maybe not, where it transitions from smooth metal down to really textured, gnarly metal. So I'm going to do that transition on this shape. So we'll pop on over to the other camera so you can see my mold making. Again, we're using the male side first, lip down. Fixing it up. Cutting any extra bits off. Talcum powder. I'm going to lay my object in. I'm going to use this flask again in a horizontal way. Pushing that object in to about halfway, about there. Lining up those registration marks. In the case of my flask, it's a giant hole. Putting in a little bit of loose crumbly clay. Pushing it down with my fingers, make sure it's tightly packed around that object. And then shove some handfuls in. I'm going to pack it. Cut off that extra bit. You're going to get filthy hands. Make sure you're wearing something that you don't mind rubbing your hands all over. There we go. Let's get that shape out of there. Not going to come. Let's give it a little poke out. Because my object has a hole in it, because it's actually a stone and it had some leather going through it. My negative has a big bump in it. So if I was to leave that bump there, I would get a hole in my silver version, but I'm not really interested in that. So I'm just going to knock that off. I don't want that there. I don't want a hole. If I want a hole, I'll drill it myself. I'm going to use the little embossing tool. I'm just going to smooth that surface down. So I want the top of this design to be very smooth at the top, transitioning down to really textured surface down here. I'm also going to clean up this section here as well, because there would have been a bit of a bump there too. Let's just really lightly smooth that down with that embossing tool.
So, Kirra-Lea, just a couple of questions about the clay and the flasks.
Yes.
Do you use the clay more than once?
Yes, but not the burnt stuff. I have a dumping tray here of all the really burnt stuff. You can't reuse it. All the oils and additives have been burnt out of it, so it no longer sticks together. It just crumbles apart. It's gone back to being just like sand. But the stuff that's still this orangey brown color, it still compresses. It still has all of its ingredients. It can be used over and over and over.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicola, for that question.
And never dries out either, by the way. A lot of people think you've got to keep it in like an airtight container. You don't. It doesn't dry out. It's oil. It goes nowhere.
Excellent. And do the flasks come in different sizes?
With the Delft Clay kit, no, you just get this one size, but you can purchase different size flasks in a variety of places. I sometimes get, you can buy them from a bunch of places. I think AJS might have different size flasks as well. I've also made my own out of wood. I made little square ones. So there's always that too. Is that it for the questions, Peter?
Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, continue, please, Kirra-Lea.
Fantastic. Okay. I would say with this design here, the back of the pendant's this flat side, the face of the pendant's this curved side. So I'm going to place my sprue hole and funnel on the back of this pendant. I'm going to put it about here. I could put it right in the middle if I wanted to. I'm just going to go closer to the top. No particular reason. Maybe it's a little bit easy to clean up. Flip that over, carve out that funnel, making sure that funnel is deep. Doesn't need to be wide. You know, just as wide as you think you can aim for, really. But the depth is the important part. You need that metal to go down nice and hot and fast. So if it's going through quite a long, skinny hole, it's bottlenecking and it's cooling down very quickly. So we don't want it to be stuck in a little tight space for any longer than it has to, which is why having a deep funnel is quite important. Using the back of my paintbrush just to rolling pin down all of that loose bits of clay. And I'm just cleaning out that hole, making sure there's no loose bits of clay in that hole either. I'm going to get my object and lay it back down. Give a little bit of a press so that that surface is nice and flat. Nice. Let's set that aside. Let's work on some texture. So I've got my sharp poker. I'm going to leave the top part alone because I want that to be really nice and smooth. But what I will do is texture down here. So it's going to start out really light. I'm using my little poker tool to scratch one direction and then I go back over it in the opposite direction. So cross hatching. And I'm going very, very lightly at first. And look, I can make it reach up the sides a little bit and just really lightly. So it sort of like turns into nothingness. And now I'm going to work back down and go a bit heavier in that cross hatching way. And your clay is going to peel up a little bit, like you're going to get balls of clay raising up. Don't worry about them for now. We'll get rid of them in a moment. I mean, the more you leave them, the more textured your piece is going to be, but also they're loose, so they can roll around and be a bit of a pain and hard to control. I like to get rid of them. So I'm just going to go, and now I'm going to go very heavy. Well, when I say very heavy, I'm just going a little bit deeper and a little bit harder, right down the bottom here. Let's get rid of all these loose bits of clay. You can dump them out or blow them out. So you can see what you're doing a little bit better. And you might see that there are bits of the surface that you haven't scratched up yet. So you go back through and just scratch up all of that surface that you want to be scratched up. I'm making sure I'm really cross-hatching over all of that. I'm going to get my fat poker. And I'm just going to really lightly try and knock off all of those loose bits of clay that have made their way free of the rest of the clay. All right. Cool.
So what would happen if you pour with those loose bits of clay there?
If I left them there, you will get some very deep holes, like some very deep crevices and stuff in your metal version. But also because they can shift around, they can all gather down the bottom, or they can move around to the top. Yeah. They can just get a bit messy. Yeah. You can leave them there and see what happens. It might turn out to be something quite interesting. I find I like to work a little bit controlled. And I think it's a good way to learn, is to control what you're doing, and then you can start sort of distressing it from there, going a bit backwards, getting a bit messier. But as long as you understand what you're doing first, leaving it, I think that's really important. Instead of just going in and doing some texture and not really knowing why it's turning out the way it is or how it's happening. I think if you understand what you're doing first, you're working a little bit clean, a little bit more controlled, and then you're adding some chaos to it, you have a better chance of controlling or predicting what chaos comes out in your texture.
That makes sense.
That's pretty much why I remove all the loose bits, particularly for this demonstration. All right, on the back of the piece, which is where the metal is going to be poured in, let's do an air vent. Let's just do a little channel, poking all the way through, opening it up from the other side. The back of this is quite plain and boring. Let's add some fun to it. I'm going to just use this leather tool. Oh, didn't do that very evenly. There we go, it's a bit better. Just so on the back of it, it's not so boring. I've got something going on. If you end up not liking it, doesn't matter, just file it off.
What are your favorite patterns?
The ones that I pulled out. Sort of like the leafy designs, the wing designs. I do have heaps of them. My partner does some leather working, and I've known about it for a long time, and I've seen his leather tools for years, and then one day it just clicked and I just went, oh, I need them. I know what I can do with them. So now they're my tools, and if he needs them, he may borrow them.
How obliging you are.
Yes, I'm very generous. Okay, that's all closed up and ready to cast. I'm going to chuck some metal in. I always guess how much metal I need. There are mathematical equations to convert wax to silver. Not all objects are wax that I've carved though. As you saw, I used just a random washer. It's a bit hard to tell what the specific gravity of that is, so it's hard to tell how much silver will actually be required for this. I just guess. I think perhaps this pendant will be 30 grams, and then I'm going to add about 10 grams more. So let's go for about 40 grams. It's always better to have more metal than less. Let's cast. I've got my safety glasses on. The other thing I should say, when you're casting, make sure your dominant hand is holding that crucible handle. Your dominant hand would be the hand that you brush your teeth with, the hand that you have the most control with, because you want to be able to control that molten metal as you're pouring it, because the molten metal is the dangerous part. Your flame's not as dangerous.
Kirra-Lea, just before you start that, could I just ask another couple of questions?
Sure can.
Sure. So one is, how did you season your crucible with borax?
So it's like glazing it or enameling it if you've done any enameling work. I've got a whole video on how to do that on my YouTube, so I'm not sure if you want to go look at that. It's a bit hard to explain, but pretty much I just heat it up and just like sprinkle borax on it. It turns to a liquid, turns to a clear liquid, and you can sort of manipulate that and glaze the whole crucible. But if you do need some visuals, there's visual guides on YouTube to show you exactly what to do.
No worries. I've put all your social links in the post, so you could follow that there, Debbie. And also, could I ask about how you finish and polish the textured surface?
Everyone's a bit different. There's lots of different ways to go about it. I usually go over it with a little steel brush just to brighten up all those crevices. Not only do I brighten up all those crevices with that steel brush, but I'm just removing that very fine surface layer of fine silver, so that when I pop my piece in liver of sulfur, the deep cracks do actually turn black. When you have a fresh casting, you have a very fine layer of silver, fine silver on the surface. Then you have the fire scale underneath, which is the copper that's risen to the surface. And then you've got your sterling underneath. You have to remove that very first, very thin layer of fine silver. Otherwise, your piece won't tarnish when you put it in a liver of sulfur or use some sort of patina agent. Because fine silver is much more stable and it doesn't react nearly as much as a copper or the sterling silver does. So that's a little tip for you guys. But then I just polish it, with the polishing motor. Sometimes I'll put it in my little magnetic pin polisher if I want to get in deep in the crevices and get it super, I don't know, like a bit of a texture polish. That there's so many different ways of cleaning up, and everybody's different, and the tools everybody has access to or can afford are always different. Figure it out yourself.
More than one way to skin a cat.
More than one way to skin a cat, absolutely. Whatever works for you.
No worries.
Was there any other questions?
That's it for now. Thank you very much.
All right, fantastic.
On with the show.
All right, let's melt this. mask on. So I can see I underestimated how much metal I needed.
Oh.
Hopefully it still worked. So the reason why I can tell that is because there's no button in that funnel, which means that all of that metal has gone inside of that flask.
Yeah.
Might have just had enough. Look at that. We just had enough. There's my tiny, tiny little button. It's not ideal. You do actually want more metal than that. But it's enough so I can show you. All right, how about I cool this down quickly? I'm just going to, because there's no stones in this, I can quench it in water. If I was casting in place with stones, you do not put your casting in water. But I can. A bit hard to tell. Whoops.
Oops.
Let me just quickly give that a bit of a file. So I'm just taking off that top surface because it's actually quite smooth, but it looks like it's textured on the camera. So I'll just take off that patinaed surface so you get a better idea of that texture. So I'm just going to really lightly go over it.
Yeah, no, we can see the effect you're aiming for. That's
fantastic.
Right.
So if I was to blacken it and then rub it back, the black would get caught in all of that texture and just the high points would be polished. So it ends up being really striking, having that strong contrast with the black and the silver. And it's quite nice having it very smooth at the top here. And on the back, I do have that little pattern that the leather working tool that I pressed into the back of it.
Okay.
If I didn't want that, I could file it all flush at the back. But otherwise, lucky, I had barely just enough metal to cast this. So I know in future, maybe I should use 50 grams instead of 40.
Well, experience is a great teacher, hey?
That's right. And don't be precious about what you're casting. The best way to learn is by doing it multiple times. So if it doesn't work the first time, you probably are learning a lot more than if it did work the first time. Figuring out why something didn't work helps you learn how to make it work in the future. Let's get rid of all of that burnt bit of clay.
So being perfect straight up can be to your detriment.
That's right, because you don't understand what you've done right.
Yeah, or what you didn't do wrong. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. There we go, got rid of all of that. Well, let's do a ring and let's cast it in a vertical way. So far we've been using this flask in a horizontal manner, which is casting this way. Now we're going to do vertical, which is utilizing that giant hole I've cut in the side of my flask.
I've got another quick question for you,
Yes.
Kirra-Lea.
Yeah, go for it.
Just before you poured your silver, you gave it a little bit of a shake.
Sure did. That's to make sure everything was molten and that I couldn't see any solid bits within it.
Fantastic. And that's exactly what Robert replied to the questioner, to make sure it's all liquid. So thank you, Robert. Thank you for the question to silver.
That all good?
Yes, thank you very much, Kirra-Lea.
Wonderful. All right, let's continue on, but using the flask in a vertical manner. Always starting with the male side first, packing it with clay, lip side down. If you get any holes in your surface, Doesn't really matter if it's on the side. If it's in the middle where you're going to be working on that surface, you do want to clean it up. But if you are concerned, you can just pick up clay, push it on that section, and there, fixed. Smooth it down. Working with clay is very, very forgiving. Let's put some talcum powder down. I'm going to be using this ring. Because I'm going to be using this flask in a vertical manner, I'm going to be pouring my metal in from this section here. So I want to make sure that my object is kind of close to that section I'm pouring from. You don't want it too close though, because it can cause some problems where your button is just way too big and it takes so long to cut it off. So do give it a bit of space, but you don't necessarily have to put your object in the middle of the flask like you would be doing if you're doing horizontal. Got it about there. Let's push it in to about halfway. There we go. Put the female half on top. Loose crumbly bits of clay first. Push it down with your fingers. Make sure the clay is nice and tightly packed around your object. And then just chuck some handfuls in. Okay, let's open that up. Let's pull that ring out. Let's create a way for the metal to get inside of this flask. So I'm just going to cut like a little triangle out. And I'll do the same thing to the opposite side. And I'm going to use the back of my paintbrush again, just to smooth down that funnel. So essentially we're just doing a funnel that leads down to that negative space, to that ring impression. I am going to get my ring and I'm going to pop it back in because I want to make sure that it's a really nice, clean impression. And I've sort of disturbed this part down at the base of the shank. I just want to clean that up. And that side looks fine. The other way to do it is get one of your embossing tools and just smooth down any raised bits of clay that happen to find their way into that negative space. Well, that's it for creating a way for the metal to go in. Now it's texture time. I'm going to show you how to do what I've been calling sort of like the corrosion look, where you've got like a big gouge taken out of the middle of the band. So what I want to do is I don't know where the camera is, I'll just do it here. What my aim is I'm going to have like a crack running through the middle of this band and down the side just a little bit. So I'll show you how to do that in the clay. It can be a little bit tedious. So I'm just gonna, all I do is just grab a bit of clay that I've smushed on my tray and break it up a little bit. And I'm gonna lay it down just like that. So some of it is poking into that negative space. And then I'm gonna press it down so it doesn't move anywhere. You can see that? And I'm just gonna do that along this surface and down the sides a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other half as well. So I'm just going to fiddle around with that, and I'll do it as quickly as possible so you guys can see what the results look like. This is where having the fine nose tweezers can be very handy. Done some on that side. Let's do some on this side. It's a good idea to do it on both sides. It just makes it a little bit more organic, a little bit more even. I know that doesn't sound right, like even and organic, but you're just giving it double width, double texture. You can try doing it just on one side if you'd like. If you want more of a narrow sort of crevice. Might look a little bit too placed though. It looks like a bit of a mess. But when I cast it, hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm envisioning. Still need an air vent.
It does look like a mess, but there's a method in your madness.
There is. So I'm just going to do the one air vent right in the middle and poke it through. Doesn't matter what side you do your air vent on when you're doing vertical, because your flask is sitting upright. So the air can escape from either side. Whereas before, when we had our, we were casting horizontal and we had our metal being poured in from the top, we would always have to have our air vent on the same side that our sprue hole and funnel is. But in this case, it doesn't matter. We can have it on either side. I'm just going to lightly press those two clay halves together just to make sure they are nice and tight. And then I'm going to wedge my flask against all of these bricks. There are like little apparatuses you can buy that'll hold your flask in this vertical way. I don't bother. I just use them bricks. They're free. Got my bolt cutters. I'm going to cut off the button from my previous casting. These bolt cutters are fantastic because you can do the fine cleanup later and you can just get right into casting right now. If you do get some bolt cutters, get the ones with the articulated arms. It's like power steering for bolt cutters. Let's grab a little bit more metal. I know I don't have enough right now, so let's grab a bit more. There we go. It's always a good idea to have more than less. Glasses on. Let's get this metal melted. Okay, mask on. Let's get this open and have a look. Make sure you always use metal tools when you're touching your freshly cast ring object.
Kirra-Lea just had a question about your mask. So if you could remind people why you're wearing your mask on that occasion there.
Yeah, sure. So wearing a mask is really important because of all this smoke that is happening when you do your casting. I've done a little bit of research and they say that they don't say that there's a problem with the smoke, but if you can see smoke, it means that there's particles raising in the air. And if you breathe those in, I can't imagine that'd be good for you to breathe in smoke particles, whether they say it's harmful or not. So I think just be on the side of caution, wear a mask. It's a little bit tricky to see that surface I've got there. So let me quickly file the top of it down so you can see what I've done. So I'll just quickly file that flush so you can see that texture a bit better. Come on. I find this corrosion style texture looks best when you've got a really flush surface so you can see exactly where all those recessed sections are. There's that crack running through the middle, and it did get a little bit unpredictable. Oh, come on, focus. Oh. On the side there, it didn't quite run down the middle like I was hoping to. It did move a bit. That's the beauty of the sand casting. So if I was to do this again, I might have actually put more clay in the middle because I like to have a chunkier gouge, like a real crevice running through the middle. And it only went a little bit down the side, but that's because I didn't put very much clay there. But that's how I get that corrosion style. I'm physically putting chunks of clay in the way of that silver. But again, I'm doing it in quite a controlled manner so that I know, well, I can anticipate roughly how it's going to look. I mean, it's still a surprise every time, which is nice, but I have a bit more of an idea of what to expect. And you can apply that in a whole range of ways. The other one I was going to show you, but I think we've run out of time. Yeah, we have. If you just imagine you've got a plain round band and you've laid bits of clay inside the flask just on one side of the band. So just on one half, you've just strategically laid down balls or little like rough bits of clay. and you've cast it, it'll come out where it's a very smooth and perfect ring on one side, but it just sort of gets really distorted and corroded all on the other side. It's a very interesting look. Anyway, maybe you guys will have a play around at home. That's all I've got time to show you guys today, but perhaps there's a few questions.
I'm sure there'd be a few comments at least. I do have a few comments from Robert K and yeah, they're both reinforcing the use of the mask, so they highly recommend using that, especially in that situation you're in there. Mm-hmm. Just hang on a sec. Right, we've got the spotlight on you, Kirra-Lea. Well, there's thousands of permutations and combinations for what you can come up with, isn't there?
That's right. Yeah.
And effectively,
even if you try to do the same thing, it'll always be different.
And you do something, and if you don't like it, do it again. That's
right. You can just melt it down and do it again.
And in that first process, guess what? You've learned something.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So let's just see if there's any other comments here. Yeah, Lynn says, thanks very much, very informative. There's a lovely comment earlier, which we should make known, and that is, this is from Donna. This is absolutely amazing. I'm learning so much. So thanks for that lovely comment, Donna.
That's great.
That's what it's all about. Yeah. So Kirra-Lea is going to be a regular with AJS on these online demos. So you'll be seeing more of her.
Yeah.
And we'll announce the next date in due course. But Kirra-Lea, thank you so much for all the tips and tricks you've shared along the way.
Very welcome.
It's been great sharing the morning. It's an excellent way to start our week. And
that's right.
Wishing you and all the people out there a good week. And we'll see you once again next time. And lots of thank yous from everybody. I do have a question. I've got a quick question here from Karen. What is the difference in sand types, Delft versus Petrobond?
Yeah. I'm not a fan of Petrobond. It's just a crude version of Delft clay. It doesn't seem to stick together as well. It's like more crumbly. You blow on the mold and like bits of clay will fly off of your impression. It doesn't seem to get as fine of detail either. Look, Petrobond, if that's all you can get your hands onto, you know, do it, give it a go. You might get very frustrated, or you might not know any better. And then one day you'll get Delft clay and your life will change.
There you go. I think you can read between the lines there and see what Kirra-Lea's opinion.
Yeah, I'm not biased at all.
No. And another one from Marty. I've been adding baby oil to my clay. Is this detrimental to my casting? That's to keep it moist, because they seem to find it goes dry. You were saying yours doesn't go dry.
No. No. I can't imagine it would be too much of a problem. I have no experience with adding that sort of thing. I can't imagine it being a problem. You know, don't do too much. Might mess with your the consistency of your clay. But if you feel like it's dried out and you need to add oil to it, go for it.
And we've got some lovely comments from people saying they're really keen to get out there and get stuck into this now. So
let's do it. Hands dirty.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, Kirra-Lea, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Very, very welcome. See you, everyone.